What's up guys, Mason the Brock Anderson here, and this is Marvel Zombies. So this is one, it may not be that important, maybe it'll be something in the future, but I was interested to check it out because the Marvel Zombies episode of What If was fairly interesting and very dark. Some dark humor mixed in as well. So getting a whole 4-episode series, granted it's not that long, but getting multiple episodes about it, I was kind of interested to see what they were going to do with it. And what we got was fairly interesting. So obviously I'm not going to dig too much into spoilers just yet. In case you haven't seen it and you want just some base thoughts on it without any spoilers, I would say check it out. If you're interested in that What If episode of the Zombies, if you like these characters in a more darker setting with a lot of death involved, just be forewarned about that. I will say the one critique that I have, without going too much into spoilers, is how jarring the tone shift can be. Because you'll literally have one episode where you got characters cracking up with each other, and then by the end of the episode, it's just so dark and depressed. People have died. Characters are crying because of death. So the tonal shifts are pretty drastic. I feel like it could have done with a bit more dry humor instead of goofy Marvel humor, but it wasn't quite enough to take the enjoyment factor out of it for me. I still had a good time with it, and so I would recommend it to anybody who, like I said, was interested in that one episode of What If where zombies were involved. But digging into the spoiler territory of this and talking a bit more about the story, I will say I was a little concerned at first because they introduced the three main characters, or who I thought were going to be the three main characters, and I was a little worried because I'm not a big fan of Miss Marvel. As I mentioned before, that young, spunky character that's a big fan of another character, I'm not really interested in that type of character, and Miss Marvel was 100% that. Kate Bishop was also that, but I felt like Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye was kind of able to balance her out pretty well in that show, so I wasn't as upset by her. And then Riri Williams, I talked at length about in Ironheart about how much her character was not made likable. So having them as the main three, I was really worried about, but we do see that doesn't last too long. It's really more so focused on Kamala Khan. And one thing I will say is in this show, they do tone her down quite a bit, which I think helps, and it makes sense, because this is not a fun world to be in. She still does have her moments where she fangirls, like when she sees Peter Parker. So I will say there are a couple of times that she feels out of place in this world because of how excitable she is. But for the most part, they do tone her down to fit this world more, and I do like that choice. And while I think there are still a lot of questions left up in the air as to why she was such a focal point from Scarlet Witch's point of view, I think having her as the main character is fine because she is one of the younger characters in all of Marvel right now, so she is the most likely to have that type of hope that wants to save the world, even though it's so dark and dreary at the moment. So I thought it was a fine choice, and by the end of it, I had no problem with the fact that she was the main character. Outside of her, looking at all the side characters, the only one that I was like, really, we gotta have her involved, is Katie, Awkwafina's character, just because I'm not a big fan of Awkwafina. She was fine in Shang-Chi, but her voice is not exactly the most pleasant to listen to. And since everybody here is voice acting, that means that's all I get from her in this. But the voice acting overall was fine. I thought everybody reprised their roles very well, some of them a lot better than they do in What If, so I was glad for that, because sometimes in What If they sound very stilted. I thought everybody that was involved did really well. I know they didn't get everybody, but they got most of the actors that played the characters to come back and voice them. So I think that really does help because they sound like themselves in this, whereas in What If, there were a couple that you could tell it wasn't the same actor. Kind of felt weird. And on top of that, I think the animation for this as well, they looked a lot more like their characters. I don't know what it is in What If, but especially after season 1, the animation felt like it took a bit of a hit, and I felt like I couldn't tell who most of the characters were because they didn't look like themselves. But yeah, looking at the animation, I thought it was good. Very gruesome at times, which is fitting in this world. I think something else that works with the animation is if these were actually the actors we were seeing that were getting torn to shreds, I think it would be a lot weirder. So the fact that this is all animated, I do think I'm able to take it a little bit more seriously. I know that's weird, saying I could take animation more seriously, but if we were actually seeing those actors being torn to shreds, I don't know why. I find that would be a lot more goofy in my mind. On top of that, they're allowed to do some pretty interesting kills because all of it's animated, which does lead to some humorous moments. But digging into the humor real fast, like I said before, it's very jarring. A lot of the scenes between Jimmy and the Death Dealer are very much out of place in this world. Again, Kamala Khan doing her fangirling over characters also feels out of place. A lot of the jokes that are very Marvel-esque, where it's just characters talking over top of each other and that's the joke, they don't really work here either. I found myself laughing more so when there was some dark humor involved. It wasn't very often, but there were a few that I'm thinking that's definitely intended to be funny, right? Like Baron Zemo going, "I regret meeting every last one of you," and then instantly a hand goes through his chest and rips him. I was like, oh my god, that's freaking hilarious. And I feel like if they had leaned in a bit more either to that dark humor, or like I said before, if the humor had been a bit more dry and sarcastic instead of the over-the-top goofiness that we've seen in Marvel recently, I feel like it would have worked for me a lot better, and I would have found myself laughing a lot more often. As it was, in those more goofy scenes, I was kind of just sitting here not laughing and not really interested in what was happening. But I think that's about it outside of the story, because talking about the story, this is where I find the most intrigue, because they do seem to come to a bit of a resolution, but with the caveat that not everything is as it seems. Maybe it'll be explained more if they get another season of it. But looking at it, I mean, the first episode is mostly about Kamala, Kate, and Riri all trying to get this thing that they find and take it to a S.H.I.E.L.D. base. And what's interesting is they had enough there to just make that one episode. The three of them just hanging out, but then they find this thing, maybe it can save the world, so they're going to take it and get it checked out. And then it ends with Kamala on her own as Riri and Kate are basically taken out by a zombie Captain Marvel. But they go a little bit further than that, which I found interesting because it felt like it was sort of wrapping up with that final climactic battle. But then Blade shows up, who is now the new avatar for Khonshu, takes her to where Red Guardian, Yelena, and Milena? I don't remember the name of Yelena and Natasha's mom now, but takes her there, and then the zombie horde attacks. They have to get out, and that was all in one episode. So when I realized how much story they managed to fit into one episode, I was actually pretty impressed. But in that, they had some interesting and funny moments. I mean, Kate Bishop shooting Captain Marvel with a trick arrow that just shoots out confetti, and then her just, oh shit, and then instantly gets vaporized. I was shocked. It was funny. Looking back, it's hilarious, but I was so shocked because at the time, too, I was still in the mindset of these three are going to be our main characters. So to see her get just blasted and destroyed after a joke like that, it's so dark. I was not expecting it. And it's the first sign of, okay, this show knows how to do some dark humor. And I was a little bit more prepared for it after that. And so I enjoyed it a bit more going forward. But with Blade picking Kamala up as well, it was fun to see him in this show, especially as an avatar for Khonshu. Something about that, it just worked. I don't know why, but it just worked. But then the final battle is appropriately intimidating. All of these zombies are just so deadly. And they have so many powerful ones too. You think about Abomination, Ghost, Hawkeye, Okoye. I feel like there was one more that I'm forgetting now. But I mean, those are enough to make it so intimidating. Abomination himself is just so hard to take down for them too. So it really sets up for what is going to be a tough season. And I was really impressed how they handled that. Then getting into episode 2, not a great start for me because, again, hearing Awkwafina's voice and seeing she's going to be heavily involved. Also seeing that apparently she can just control the 10 rings. Somebody's going to have to explain to me how that makes sense. Because I assumed it was a genetic thing. That's why Shang-Chi is able to control them since his father was able to control them, or since he bested him in battle. I don't know. I figured there was something genetic about it that he was able to control them. So the fact that he's able to just let Katie control them too, that doesn't seem right to me, but we haven't learned a lot about the 10 rings. So maybe they've just invented some stuff behind the scenes that they'll talk about later. I don't know. But seeing her involved was not that interesting. Seeing Jimmy get involved was kind of funny at first, especially when he and Death Dealer had a couple of scenes early on. There were a couple scenes I'm like, okay, that's kind of funny. But then the more it went on, the more I was like, okay, this is getting really goofy. Like there's scenes in the truck, funny. There's scenes at the raft, I think is what it's called. Whenever he's talking about the bunk bed situation, not as funny because now it's getting goofy. The more you have him be over the top with his jokes. But this whole setup with the raft is fairly interesting. Seeing Baron Zemo in charge of it, he does seem to still be the same piece of shit that he was in Civil War that likes to manipulate people to his own benefit because it keeps him safe to have all these people around. Having Namor be the one that's attacking the raft is also a good setting because it's underwater, so that is his element. There's a lot about this setup that I think really worked, but this is where I felt like the seriousness of the show really started to take hold. Because in the first episode, you did have the scene with Alexi losing, again, I forget her name. I want to say it's Melina, but I could be wrong about that. But you had that scene, and it was pretty sad, but it was pretty rushed over because they had to get out of there before Abomination took them out. But in this one, they really let that scene with Yelena sit. And honestly, I thought both David Harbour and Florence Pugh, they really brought it in their vocal performances. Because again, it's not easy for actors to go into voice acting. There's a lot about it that's different, and it's why I do think so many very talented actors in What If sounded kind of stilted. There's a different feel to the acting you have to do with voice acting. So I thought both of them, though, in that scene really brought it, and brought out a bit of emotion too. I didn't cry, but I did get a little choked up watching the scene. But again, that's why that scene really works. But when it's preceded by Jimmy talking to Death Dealer about the bunk bed situation, that doesn't fit. But that takes us into episode 3 and seeing a bit what happened with Thanos or I guess zombie Thanos in the Infinity Gauntlet. Because I think that's where the What If Marvel Zombies ended, was with him with the Infinity Gauntlet. So seeing how that battle ended, first of all, once again, very brutal. Seeing Rocket and Groot get decimated by the Gauntlet, which is absolutely crazy to me. I do kind of wonder if there's any parents that turn this on because like, oh, it's animation, surely it won't be that bad. And then you see Rocket turn into a skeleton and the kids that they left to watch it are now crying. But it shows just how tough that battle was and the fact that they managed to defeat him. I do wish maybe that had been a little bit more of a story for us instead of just kind of rushed through, but it was fine. It was a fun little story that built into where this story was going. But we also do see what happened to Thor in that battle, and then whenever the main characters that we're following meet Valkyrie and see the new Asgard and where they are, it does connect pretty well, and I think they did a good job building up that story. I will say, though, I was a little disappointed because when Wanda showed up, my mind started racing with what could possibly be happening. Is it somehow Wanda and Scarlet Witch got separated? Maybe she found a way to separate her human self with her zombie self, and so that's why her zombie self is so powerful, because it's not hindered by the human body of Wanda. There are a lot of questions I had with the idea that maybe she was actually a good guy, but then of course that turns out to not be the case. This is just a projection that she's giving to everybody. And yeah, from there, I mean, it does get really intense. Death Dealer getting absolutely destroyed. Jimmy as well getting ripped apart was crazy. I will say I was a little disappointed that Alexei went out how he did. Where he was such a big character for the first 2 episodes, losing his wife and then his daughter, to see him go out because he ate some of the disguised zombie food that was there, I felt like that was a little lame for him. That was one disappointing thing that I thought they did in that episode, but having Thor show up, having him go up against Scarlet Witch to buy them some time to get out of there, it was appropriately epic. I think they did a really good job with the animation on the fight scenes as well. But then you have the cliffhanger ending of episode 3 where we see the Nova Corps actually quarantine Earth because of the zombie invasion, so they're not going to be able to help. But this takes us into the final episode, and this is where all the truth starts to drop. We find out about the fact that the Hulk is now taking all of the Infinity Stone's energy into himself, which I will admit I was a little lost on all this, so I think Scarlet Witch Zombie wanted to take that power. Still don't know exactly why. We still don't know what her goals were, because by the end of it, there's this sudden turn where all of a sudden she wants to help the world. She wants to heal it. And it seems like she's wanting to use the power of the Infinity Stones to reset to before the zombie apocalypse. But we see at the end, it seems like that's not actually the case. But with this setup, though, it does become very much about basically Scarlet Witch's whole zombie horde trying to take out the Hulk so she can, I guess, make him weak enough to take his power for herself. And it was kind of entertaining to see just how powerful he is with all of this infinity energy inside of him. That he's just wiping out all these super powerful zombies ahead of him. Just one punch and they're decimated. But as far as the ending, there's a lot going on here that I'm not really sure about. So first of all, you've got Wanda offering Kamala this opportunity to work with her. And again, I'm not really sure what she does at the ending with her power, but we see her throwing all of these former loved ones of everybody back at them. And what's confusing about that is, for Jimmy, we did see him get torn to shreds, but he's also in pieces as a zombie, so it kind of makes sense. But for Death Dealer, I mean, his head was smashed in. So I don't know how he could still be a zombie at this point. But we see Kate and Riri both attacking Kamala there at the end. And that doesn't make any sense because for Riri, I mean, she might have been turned because we didn't really see what happened to her as the fight was ending. But for Kate, she wouldn't be a zombie because she got decimated by zombie Captain Marvel. So it doesn't make sense that she would be there either. So I don't know how much of this was a trick from zombie Scarlet Witch, but we can see everything just completely going to shit in that moment. The sorcerers are dying. Spider-Man's about to get eaten by, I think, giant wasp zombie. Scott's head case is getting cracked. Shang-Chi just got bit on the arm, so he's starting to turn. Khonshu seemed to have been blasted away by zombie Thor. So it's definitely all going to shit. And so Kamala makes the decision to accept Scarlet Witch's help and turn back time or something. I don't know what. And I will say it's a weird choice to end it here, because if this is the ending, then we just have to assume that no, Scarlet Witch was actually trying to help this whole time. And so this is her way of helping, is getting rid of all of this. But then of course we see Kamala starting to see through what seems to be an illusion. And she sees all the zombies around and Riri is still there, which means there's a chance she could have survived that fight after Kate got killed. So it does feel like a very odd place to end it, because we don't know if we're going to be getting another season of this or not. If we don't, then this is a weird place to end, because we don't feel like we really resolved anything. It feels like Scarlet Witch got her way and convinced Kamala that everything is fine now when it really isn't. But if we do, I mean, this is a pretty interesting place to leave it off. There's a lot of questions that can be answered. So I do kind of hope that this is not the only season we're getting, honestly, because I want to see more. I do want to see where this story is going to go. I don't feel satisfied with this ending. So in that way, I would liken it to Loki season 1 or WandaVision, where it's a good show. It was entertaining throughout, but the ending does kind of leave you wanting more. There's a sense of this isn't finished. And I find that a little odd that we decided to end it in that way. So final thoughts. I liked it overall. I had a good time with it. I do think the tone could have used some work. I think the story as a whole works, even if the ending is a little unfulfilling. And it's got me wanting a season 2, so I think that's a good thing, I would say. But those are all of my thoughts on it. So with that, cue the outro. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching that review. I hope you enjoyed it. First and foremost, please leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I love having discussions with people, so whatever your thoughts were, whether you agree or disagree with me, please leave them down below. Obviously, no spoilers. Also, if you did find yourself enjoying this review and you want to see more, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me out. I also have a gaming channel as well as a channel where I talk about soccer, so if you want to give those a follow as well, that would be much appreciated. And lastly, if you want to help me improve upon the quality of these channels, I do have a Patreon. All of this is in the description below. With all that being said, I hope you guys have a great day, and I will talk to y'all later. Peace out.